Stand types are descriptive, not categorical. Instead of looking at them as separate rules, it's simpler to just consider the base rules and see how each stand branches out from there. Because if stands represent the fighting spirits of their users and aren't their causes, it follows that stand categories are patterns, or labels, instead of alternate mechanics. So what would each trend of stands mean? If we're considering how they branch from the base premise, one of the reasons stands have a body is because capable people consider every part of their body something they have available to solve problems with. Their point of view is symbolized, along with the body they have, under any kind of theme or power that fits the particular methods they use. So the norm is that your stand power contains one humanoid that mirrors the user, and its physical strength reflects your purest form of agency, from the basic mental stats and muscle that give you strength without specific methods. But this can vary depending on how much the user depends on a certain concept. If I rely too much on my methods, I'd lose the limbs I could control, and my stand wouldn't become a person. It'd just be something that could conduct the power. And if I depend too much on some kind of object, my stand would just possess that. What if you have a part of your body that symbolically fits what you rely on? Your stand would be tied to it. If your power as a person comes from surrounding yourself in a vehicle, your stand would possess that vehicle, boosting its power and making what it can do more flexible to build on how you still manually control it. In general, your stand is given a body to show how you put yourself, your point of view, out there to solve any sorts of problems. So what would it mean if instead of a separate form, your stand is a suit you wear around your body? Aggression is a key stat for solving problems, because if you're always on defense, or you just try to rationalize what's happening to you, you're never taking steps that could change or challenge anything. That's why someone with a strong will, like Holly, could still never qualify for a stand. If someone's fighting spirit is worn around them, it means as a person, they lean into and make their decisions based on their method of fighting. They might be impulsive or aggressive, and they let those traits define who they are and what they do. Keicho draws power from giving into his anger issues, and Secco fits into any kind of role if it pleases him because he lives like an animal. They're guided by their ways of fighting, which might, in the bigger picture, hinder them. But suit stand users are still people who solve their direct problems. The opposite category would be bodiless stands, the power-only abilities given to people who don't get a stand they can summon because they don't have the strength to solve their problems. The agency they have comes from the strength they have to avoid their wider issues, like Paco, who does physical activity and steals to cope with trauma, Oingo, who seems to run away, do whatever's necessary, and steal to cope with trauma, and Charming Man, who caves around his opponents and only fights them from where they don't even bother to look, and ends up stealing to cope with trauma, like a sadder Bill Denbrough. It's not only stealing. Ungolo escapes his problems through drugs and fantasy, Ferdinand wastes his potential in the pyramid scheme of academia, and Mike O glorifies every position he's given by Valentine's administration that wouldn't ever want him to have actual power. Having a bodiless stand just means you don't have the nature to solve your actual problems, despite having a clear type of fighting spirit. So what would it mean if someone's stand has multiple bodies? Humans collaborate with each other, because on some level, other people's work helps us. Even the strongest stand users who can solve their own problems rely on the advancements of human knowledge and resources made available by others. There are roles people are meant to fill for us, even emotionally or for stability, like picking lice off each other's backs. So if someone is lacking the people to fill these roles for them, so their strength just has to account for these missing roles and cover them itself, instead of one big fitting-sized stand, theirs is split into a bunch of tiny stands. Keicho needed to hold his family together and provide for them when his father was turned into slime, and as a kid, the only way he could handle all that was to adopt military-level strictness and efficiency. And Shigechi was a social outcast who made up for the lack of friends to spend time with the way any persevering kid would, by finding hobbies and toys to occupy his time, so that way he could stay cheery despite having lonely circumstances. In part 5, Mista's strength comes from how he goes with the flow but is flexible enough to make the most out of it and improvise around his destiny, which is why he's the member of Bruno's team that survives the final battle. He's given a stand that rides on his bullets, but applies applies his agency to add to their power and change their trajectories, like how when he was handed a gun, he worked with it to great success, and when he was handed a prison sentence, he quickly pivoted his life to work as a member of Passion. Mista was able to live his life as one with the universe, peaceful and content enough on his own, by going with the flow. So his stand is a small colony of only 6 members because it only needs to be a family he can share it with. But what would it mean if someone's stand just has one body but can swap out its form for a different power? If your sources of power have a trade-off, your stand would reflect that. But an act stand is specifically given to someone who needs to manually learn how to become capable of solving their problems, letting them build what their methods are over time, at the cost of them not being able to apply their full arsenal at once. Keicho and Johnny are both given base opportunities to grow from. In Johnny's case, he adopts tactics he might not always have time to carry out, so his acts are pure upgrades building on the previous ones, only conditional. Whereas in Keicho's case, he's a bit short-sighted and ends up with tunnel vision, so he can only call on one narrower mindset at a time out of the ones he's unlocked, which is the flaw that leads to him developing a power that can't even win the fight it's awakened in, because when he's aggressive, he definitely can't account for multiple targets. The stand he loses to uses an automatic power, sheer heart attack, so he has to deal with 2 targets at the same time. And automatic stands represent the methods of people who don't engage with their problems themselves. If the basic stand is your body because you put yourself out there to solve problems, a colony stand is multiple bodies because your methods are split to cover roles other people aren't filling, and a power-only stand lacks a body because you don't solve your problems. An automatic stand is something else's body, at least in the cases where someone doesn't bother manually solving their problems at all. Sheer heart attack can transfer damage to its user because Kira still involves himself in his conflicts. But if someone's not present in a danger and they're relying on some sort of rigid procedure or resource to process an obstacle for them, they're not really there, so they wouldn't take damage if the mirror of their methods is injured. Instead, the stand embodies whatever system they rely on, and if a person has a cutoff point where they don't process a part of their methods, that's where automation can kick in for any body or ability. Yotsuyu, the parasite, gets close to a target in any way to increasingly bleed them dry, so everything of a certain type of object is dragged into whoever he touches. But Yotsuyu picks the exact way he applies his power, critically, depending on the scenario he's dealing with, like a normal stand user. And I Am a Rock is not an automatic stand. People can't determine cause and effect, they only see patterns. So a big emphasis in the series is on character perspective, which is why sometimes panels show details the characters think are true instead of what's really there. A competent problem solver is always open to spot signs of obstacles from their point of view, so they can critically judge their circumstances and the best choice of action for that situation. That's why automatic stands are a cautionary trade-off. An automatic stand is given to someone who processes their problems through a rigid system out of that convenience, and while doing so can expand their range and even free them from the risks of committing themselves, the stand becomes clumsy where it's not able to process the nuances of a situation. Polpo relies on the mechanisms of the underworld to fulfill his job without having to leave his home, so his stand moves through the shadows, but the system he enables catches civilians in its operations, angering an enemy he'd remain unaware of until his execution. Wonder of You may outsource to the wider universe, granting it range and some clumsiness from being carried by the wind, but Toru is not an automatic stand user. He's not just involved in his problems, he processes each one, but he uses his methods to exploit other sources of strength, like the advantages he was born with and Yasuho's Paisley Park, which is why his stand resembles an automatic one. Paisley Park is an unconscious stand, which are given to someone who can't solve their problems consciously, but capably solves them anyway. Highway to Hell lets the user transfer damage, like how someone can bring the others around them down by threatening to escalate things for themselves. And Paisley Park walks along the chains of cause and effect to be able to nudge them, like how Yasuho's sort of just integral to everything in Morio. An unconscious stand doesn't symbolize the user's self-aware center of focus, so it has a flexible shape, but in order to control it, the user would have to artificially develop some sort of cushion or framework in how they interact with it to avoid whatever form of self-consciousness that keeps them from succeeding deliberately. Shared stands are given to people whose agency comes from working together in a group. Tomb of the Boom is used by a family of outlaws who rob people and get by in the West by operating together, and Tattoo You is used by by a strict group of agents who disregard their own lives and only consider themselves as a single tool to accomplish a goal for Valentine's administration. It could also explain why Valentine never tried to make an army of stand users, cause if, as the authority, he needed the guarantee of loyalty from them, he probably couldn't mass awaken people unless they were strict and obedient like these agents. But as a result, they wouldn't have separate agencies, meaning their stand would just be shared among them. But that's sort of the last type of stand category. These are all trends, but suits, colonies, automatics, unconscious types, bodiless types, shared types, and possessed vehicles are the only distinct categories of stands that significantly differ from the base rules. But it's not that they operate under different rules. They're just symbolizing different things because of the deeper rules that define stands. So if you're trying to figure out what type of stand someone might have, it could always blur the lines, having different traits from across categories, or even its own way of symbolizing whatever its combined traits are. You don't have to think in terms of the categories that exist, unless their symbolism makes it easier to process the character the stand belongs to.